Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're well, guys. So, now, today we're going to talk about the same theory that I developed in my last video about the judging functions, but we're going to apply the grid to the perceiving functions. Okay, we're moving from judgment to perception, but at the same time, we're going to use the same model, so to speak, and that will involve some references to the judging functions. So, what role do the perceiving functions play, and how can we break them down? So, in the case of judgments, we said that a judgment was a compound divided between internal deliberation and external presentation and justification. Internal deliberation is for TI and FI. External presentation and justification was for FE and TE. Now, in the case of the extroverted functions, here again we have four functions that are featured in various stacks, functional stacks. So two of them are extroverted, as you know, extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing, and ENSC, and then two of them are introverted intuition, NI, featured as the dominance of the INFJ, and then introverted sensing. In the past, somewhat misleadingly in hindsight, I referred to the perceiving functions as gathering functions, gathering data, and to the judging functions as the organizing functions, organizing the data. So like perception would be gathering and judgment would be organizing. Now, this is not the worst distinction I think that you can ever come up with, but at the same time, I think it lacks the level of detail that allows us to distinguish between various types of perceiving functions and judging functions. So just in the same way that the judging functions can be further divided between, the justificatory functions that are extroverted and the deliberative functions that are introverted. In the case of the perceiving functions, you can distinguish between the extroverted perceiving functions, which I would call the legitimate gathering functions, and then the introverted perceiving functions. And actually, I would rather call those not so much gathering as processing functions. And that's an important distinction, because if we don't draw the distinction, what happens is we leave it up to the judging functions to actually do the organizing. And it is my claim that the organizing is partly, the processing and the internal deliberation. So, in other words, the organizing part is itself divided between what I would say introverted perception and introverted judgment. So there's a part of perception and a part of judgment in the organizing of data, the processing and the deliberation. But in terms of the perceiving functions, the main difference between gathering data, what the outside world gives you, what does it give you? Let's say facts. Okay, let's call those facts. Well, facts are given. They cannot come from inside yourself. If you're not, proponents of solipsism, if you believe that it is the outside world that provides you with facts, it comes from outside. So it's necessarily an external function that gathers those facts. Okay. Now, it's either sensing or intuition, and those two are different, and we'll discuss the difference in a minute. Now, once the data is gathered, you have to process it. The processing is actually not yet at the level of judgment. Judgment comes later. First you gather the data, then you process the data, then you deliberate. You have a process of internal deliberation, and then you present and you justify. So in other words, chronologically speaking, if I may express it like that, the movement is from extrovert perception to introverted perception to introverted introverted judgment to extroverted judgment. Okay, that's how it happens, because you cannot present a judgment without having had a process of internal deliberation first. You cannot have a process of internal deliberation if the data that you're going to make a judgment about has been processed, and you cannot process that data if you've not gathered it in the first place. And so, that's an interesting way of looking at, the manipulation of data. You're gathering, processing, deliberating, presenting, and justifying. And in those four kind of, parts of the process, you have the 8 different functions, depending on whether they are sensing or, sensing or intuition, and judgment via thinking, or judgment via feeling. And so now, what that means is that if you take an INFJ, for example, like the first thing that they're going to do when they're dealing with data is not to use introverted intuition, because introverted intuition is not a gathering function according to this model. It is a processing function. So the first thing that they do is actually to gather the data via extroverted sensing. And luckily, every single type has an extrovert perception function somewhere in their stack. And the INFJ uses it all the time. They have to use it all the time, otherwise they could not use introverted intuition, they could not use introverted thinking, and they could not use extroverted feeling. So when we say that in the case of an INFJ, the extroverted sensing is weak, we're not saying that the INFJ doesn't use it often. INFJ uses extroverted sensing all the time, because that's kind of how they get to data. We're saying that they're unconscious of doing it. Okay, they don't have a lot of control over doing it, if you remember some of the terminology from my previous video. They don't have a lot of control over it, but they're doing it all the time. So when someone tells you, yeah, don't use extroverted sensing a lot, it's kind of like, if by that you mean consciously use, then fine. But you always make use of it. All the time. It's absolutely necessary. Okay, so extroverted sensing, in the case of an INFJ, provides them with access to the data. The processing is introverted intuition. Deliberation is introverted thinking. Presentation and justification, extroverted feeling. And you can apply that to any type. The main difference between extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing as gathering functions are that one is static, one is rather static, takes facts as they are, and the facts have clear-cut corners. That's extroverted sensing. In the case of extroverted intuition, it's fluid. So the facts have boundaries that are porous, and they mix with other facts a lot more easily, and kind of get all mixed up, and you get new facts, and it's all that kind of mess. But what you have to realize is that you cannot have pure fluid perception, and you cannot have pure static perception. So if someone has extroverted intuition as their gathering function, they access facts with fluid boundaries, fluid borders. They eventually get solidified through the processing of introverted sensing. If a type has a gathering function, which is SE, which is kind of like static boundary, clear-cut fact accessed, they're going to melt those boundaries through introverted intuition. Okay, and that's what happens in the case of an INFJ. And if you are a true blue INFJ, the way that you relate to facts is not through through extroverted intuition. Facts, you take them kind of whole. It's only afterwards, when you start processing them, that they kind of get all mixed, and you start to see patterns, and then you present them. So there's quite an inverse process here between an NE dominant and an NI dominant, and you can apply that to SE and SI as well. So I'm going to stop here for now, because I want to dedicate many different videos to these different topics. I just wanted to give you a little taste of where these thoughts are leading me at the moment, and I'm really excited to continue working on this model, and apparently some of you viewers are liking this investigative approach as well. So long may it last. See you soon.